of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission may not be spending time at the Custodial Center after being remanded by an FCT High Court judge for contempt. But this is because Abdulrasheed Bawa says he has filed a suit to set aside the order of the court. Although legal professionals have asked the EFCC chairman to commit himself to the court order. Sifon reports.
The EFCC is grappling with shock after an FCT High Court remanded its chairman in prison for contempt. The judge, Chizoba Oji, convicted Mr. Abdulrasheed Bawa and ordered the Inspector General of Police to put him in Kuje prison in Abuja for disobeying an earlier order of the court. The EFCC and Mr. Bawa's offences border on failure to comply with the November 21st, 2018 court order directing them to return a Range Rover and a sum of 40 million naira to the applicant in a suit. In a statement, the EFCC spokesman insisted that the chairman had released the Range Rover in question to the applicant on June 27, 2022 and had approved the process of releasing the remaining 40 million naira. Nonetheless, the order of the FCT High Court is yet to be obeyed as the Anti-Corruption Agency has initiated a process to set aside the entire contempt proceedings and committal of its chairman for contempt.
Even EFCC themselves, their slogan is, nobody is above the law. Being not above the law, he has to face the law.
From the case of the former National Security Advisor Sambo Dasuki to that involving Nnamdi Kanu, research has shown that the government and its agencies have violated several court orders.
But every Nigerian, every institution, every authority is expected to obey an order of court. But you see, like I said before, there's an exception. If you have appealed against that order, you file the motion for stay. The court will first of all hear those applications.
A federal high court in Abuja ordered the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, to appear before it on January 18, 2023 to explain his refusal to obey valid order for payment of a $70 million debt. Disobedience to court orders have far-reaching consequences on the rule of law, and experts are concerned.
Fundamental right of approaching court at every level is guaranteed in the Constitution so that we avoid jungle justice. As much as possible, we should put our matter before the court.
In the extant case, what is yet to be seen is how the EFCC will succeed in setting aside the entire contempt proceedings and committal of its chairman for contempt. Sifon Asian, TVC News, Abuja.
So talking judicial matters, a 100 billion naira suit has been filed against President Muhammadu Buhari at the Federal High Court in Abuja. The suit seeks to address the alleged unlawful removal of Senator Ifeanyi Godwin Ararume as a non-executive chairman of the newly incorporated Nigeria National Petroleum Company Limited. Ms. Ararume is challenging the manner he was removed as the NNPC chief after using his name to incorporate the entity. Judiciary correspondent Celestina Area reports.
Mr. Ararume formulated 4 issues for determination by the court, among which was whether the office of the non-executive chairman is not governed and regulated by the provisions of the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2010 and the Petroleum Industry Act 2021. He is also asking the court to determine whether, by the interpretation of Section 63 subsection 3 of the PIA, the president can lawfully remove him as a non-executive chairman of the NNPC for any reason outside the provisions of the law. Also listed for determination is if his purported removal via a letter dated 17th January 2022 without compliance with expressly stated provisions of the law is not wrongful, illegal, null and void, and of no legal consequences whatsoever. Upon the determination of the issues in his favor, the plaintiff wanted the court to make a declaration that his position as a non-executive chairman of the NNPC is exclusively governed and regulated by CAMA 2020, the PIA 2021, and the Memorandum of Association of the company. He also sought an order of the court restating him forthwith and restoring him the rights and privileges of the office of the NNPC non-executive chairman. At today's proceedings, Justice Ian Eku ordered that the Corporate Affairs Commission be joined as parties in the suit following non-objection from the counsel to Mr. Ararume, Ms. Uche, and counsel to the President. Justice Eko subsequently fixed 15th December for mention in the suit and ordered that the amended originating summons be served on the parties before their adjourned dates.
The time has come for Nigerians to begin to insist that the right thing is done, whether it's by the president, because what we are running is a democracy. This is not an imperial majesty. This is not a situation where you say the king can do no wrong. If the president does anything wrong, either based on bad advice or non-advice, it is the responsibility of the citizens to bring it to the fore. That is the only way this country will move forward.
Mr. Arome has requested for 100 billion naira as damages for the wrongful removal, disruption and interruption of his term of office as the non-executive chairman of the NNPC. Celestina Iria, TVC News, Abuja.
Let's talk a bit of climate-related stories, where the United States climate envoy, John Kerry, has announced a new controversial plan to raise cash for climate action in the developing world by selling carbon credits to companies wishing to offset their polluting emissions. Speaking at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt, Mr. Kerry said the initiative, which he said should be up and running within a year, would help finance energy transition in vulnerable countries. He said Chile and Nigeria were two countries that had already expressed interest in the scheme. But the plan has already attracted criticism because of the way it will be financed, with money raised in sales of carbon credits, which allow companies to pay for someone else to cut their planet-warming emissions instead of cutting it themselves. For more on this development, Rachel Rose Jackson, Director, Climate Research and Policy at Corporate Accountability, joins us live via Zoom from Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Thanks for joining us on TVC News at 7. I'm curious, what really do you make of this stance by the U.S., which is believed to obstruct any meaningful outcome of the climate summit?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I wish I could have better news, but unfortunately, this is exactly what we would expect from the U.S., the world's largest historical polluter and the world's wealthiest country. For as long as climate policy has existed, the U.S. has always been the largest obstructor of climate action. It's denied the meaningful actions and the policy mechanisms and the real finance that people across Africa and around the world direly need in order to be able to adapt to and survive the climate crisis. And just a couple weeks ago, in the lead up to COP27, we heard Kerry proclaiming to the world that the U.S. was ready to stop obstructing, that it was ready to stop talking and start walking. And unfortunately, everything that we've seen here on the ground at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and the announcement by Kerry earlier today shows that the U.S. is hell-bent on doing exactly what it always has done, rolling out the red carpet and greenwashing its polluting image, declaring itself a climate champion, but being anything but. And this latest announcement today about this carbon offset scheme is truly worrying and will wreak devastation on people and land across Africa and around the world.
All right. Well, as it stands now, indigenous voices are already describing this move as humiliating. What would you suggest is done to have a meaningful consensus at this COP27?
For there to be a meaningful outcome at this COP needs to start being a polluters COP, and it needs to start being a people's COP, and a true African COP. We've heard this called the COP27 being the African COP, and it is no such thing. Let's be very clear, this COP is a COP in Africa, but it's being bought and paid for by polluting corporations and polluting countries, and it's being manipulated and spun by them in order to deliver their polluters' wish list, and it doesn't matter how many lives they have to condemn in the process. In order for this COP to deliver, world governments would need to first start by kicking out the very polluting corporations who are most responsible for climate change and most responsible for the climate impacts felt by Africans and others around the world out of this process. As long as polluters are here in these halls at COP, these climate talks will never deliver the action that people need around the world and that people in Africa are demanding as well. Secondly, in order for this COP to deliver, the countries like the US need to finally pay their overdue climate debt to people in the global south. This does not mean setting up a carbon market scheme to offload their responsibility, to mobilize private finance by some of the very polluters who are responsible for climate change, and to shift the burden of action onto African people and other people around the global south. That's what Kerry's plan today would do. What we need instead is for public finance directly for and by and with the people to be handed over into the hands where it's owed, not for these polluting, dangerous schemes that risk great harm to continue.
All right, Ms. Jackson.
Finally,
I'm afraid I need to quickly butt in here. What would you expect African countries to do at this time? Because they were expected to speak with one voice at the ongoing summit.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
What would you expect African countries to do at this time? Because as it is, some countries already signing up for that energy transition accelerator.
Yeah. If African governments are representing the needs of their people, then they'll be holding the US to account. They'll be refusing these carbon market schemes that just shift the burden of responsibility and the suffering and decades more of suffering and lack of energy onto their people. And they'll stand up. They won't stand up to US bullying. They'll demand the climate finance they're owed. They'll ensure that it gets the people on the front lines that they need. And they'll stop tinkering with rules of offsets or carbon markets, which are just dangerous distractions that risk the very lives of Africans and others around the world, and demand real solutions such as the technology and the capacity and the finance to be able to ensure that Africans across the continent have access to people-controlled renewable energy, for example, or have the food sovereignty that they're owed and the ability to eat and grow food. Until or unless African governments stand up to rather than enable the bullying of the US will be continued to obstruct and bully forward unchecked.
All right, then, I must sincerely appreciate you. Director, Climate Research and Policy at Corporate Accountability, Rachel Rose Jackson. Thank you for your time on TVC News at 7.